The dust devil that tore through Rock Springs, Wyoming that morning in June 1878 carried more than just prairie dirt and tumbleweed. It brought a stranger whose arrival would change everything Fiona Reynolds thought she knew about her carefully ordered life. Fiona stood behind the counter of her father's mercantile, methodically arranging jars of preserves while trying not to think about the fact that she had turned 23 last month and was still unmarried in a town where most women wed by 19. The bell above the door chimed, and she glanced up to see him, a tall figure silhouetted against the bright morning sun, his broad-brimmed hat casting shadows across a face she could not quite make out. He moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle, his boots leaving faint prints of red Wyoming clay across the swept floorboards her father had insisted she clean that morning. "Help you?" Fiona asked, keeping her voice level and professional, despite the sudden flutter in her chest that annoyed her with its unwelcome arrival. The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey catching lamplight. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from sleeping under stars and riding through storms. A drifter, she thought immediately. Rock Springs saw plenty of them, men passing through on their way to somewhere else, always somewhere else. "Need supplies," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel underfoot. "Traveling light, but I could use coffee, hardtack, maybe some jerky if you have it." Fiona nodded and began gathering the items, acutely aware of his gaze following her movements. She had inherited her mother's red hair, though she kept it pinned severely back in a way that suggested she had no patience for vanity. Her green eyes, her father always said, came from his Irish grandmother, along with a stubborn streak that had driven away more than one potential suitor. "Passing through?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Was planning on it," he said, and something in his tone made her glance up sharply. "Most do," Fiona replied, wrapping the jerky in brown paper. "Rock Springs is not exactly a destination, more of a stop along the way." "You always this cheerful with customers." Despite herself, Fiona felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "Only the ones who look like they will be gone by sunset." He laughed then, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise both of them. "Fair enough. Name's Harrison Reid, and you would be?" "Fiona Reynolds. My father owns this store." "Just you and your father?" The question was casual, but Fiona had learned to hear the real inquiry beneath such words. She set the wrapped packages on the counter with perhaps more force than necessary. "My mother passed when I was 12. Fever took her one winter and never gave her back. It has been just the two of us since." Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I am sorry. That is a hard thing." Fiona tallied his purchases, uncomfortable with sympathy from a stranger. "That will be $2.30. Harrison counted out the coins slowly, his fingers sun-browned and calloused. When he placed them in her palm, his hand lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Fiona pulled back quickly, busying herself with putting the money in the till. "Much obliged," Harrison said, gathering his supplies. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Is there a decent place to get a meal around here? Mrs. Chen runs a boarding house 2 streets over. She serves dinner at 6. The food is good and she does not water down the coffee." "Maybe I will see you there." "I doubt it. I eat at home." Harrison Reid smiled, a slow curving of his lips that suggested he enjoyed a challenge. "Shame," he said, and then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him and leaving Fiona alone with the lingering scent of leather and saddle soap, and something else she could not quite name. Her father emerged from the back room, wiping his hands on his apron. Thomas Reynolds was a solid man in his 50s, graying at the temples but still strong from years of hauling crates and barrels. Who was that? A drifter. Harrison Reid. He bought traveling supplies. Thomas grunted. We get a lot of those. Did he pay? Yes, Papa. Then I suppose it does not matter who he is. But as Fiona returned to arranging the preserves, she found herself thinking about whiskey-colored eyes, and the way Harrison Reid had said maybe I will see you there, like he meant it, like he might actually stay. She was still thinking about it that evening as she prepared dinner in the small kitchen behind the mercantile, where she and her father lived. The house was modest but clean, filled with her mother's things that neither of them could bear to put away. Fiona moved around the familiar space with practiced efficiency, frying salt pork and boiling potatoes while her mind wandered to places it had no business going. You are quiet tonight, her father observed over dinner. Am I? More than usual. Something on your mind? Fiona considered lying, then decided against it. Her father could always tell anyway. That man today, Harrison Reid, did you notice anything about him? Thomas chewed thoughtfully. Seemed like most drifters. Why? I do not know. Something felt different. Her father gave her a long look. Fiona, girl, you know better than to get ideas about men like that. They never stay. They cannot. Something drives them, and that something is always stronger than any reason to put down roots. I know that, Papa. I was just making an observation. But that night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the wind rattle the shutters, Fiona found herself wondering where Harrison Reid was sleeping. Had he taken a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house? Was he already on his horse, riding toward the next town under a sky full of stars? And why did she care? The next morning brought the answer. Harrison Reid was sitting on the bench outside the mercantile when Fiona arrived to open the store, his long legs stretched out in front of him and his hat tipped low over his eyes. For a moment she thought he might be asleep, but as she approached, he straightened and stood in one fluid motion. Morning, he said. You are still here, seems that way. Fiona unlocked the door, very aware of Harrison following her inside. Did you need something else? Actually, I was wondering if you might need some help around here. I noticed yesterday that you have some heavy crates stacked kind of haphazard in the back. Could be dangerous if they fell. Fiona turned to face him fully. Are you looking for work? I am offering to help. Why? Harrison removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Because I am trying to figure out a reason to stay in this town for a while, and helping a pretty woman seems like as good a reason as any. Heat flooded Fiona's cheeks. I am not pretty and we cannot pay you. You are wrong about the first part, and I did not ask for money. Then what do you want? He met her gaze steadily. Honestly, I am not entirely sure yet. But I woke up this morning thinking about this mercantile and the woman who runs it with her father, and I thought maybe I would stick around long enough to figure it out. Fiona's heart was beating too fast. She tried to think of all the sensible reasons to send him away, but her mouth seemed to have other ideas. The crates are in the back room. If you knock anything over, you pay for it. Harrison's smile could have lit the whole territory. Yes, madam. He worked through the morning, reorganizing the storeroom with an efficiency that suggested he had done similar labor before. Fiona tried to focus on her own tasks, but she found her attention drifting toward the back room, toward the sounds of crates being moved and Harrison's occasional grunt of effort. When her father arrived at mid-morning, he stopped short at the sight of the stranger working in their storeroom. What is this? Harrison Reid offered to help with the heavy lifting, Fiona said quickly. I did not think you would mind. Thomas studied Harrison with narrowed eyes. You the fellow from yesterday? Yes, sir. I hope I am not overstepping. You getting paid for this? No, sir. Just trying to make myself useful. Thomas looked between Harrison and his daughter, and Fiona could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Well, if you are working, you should at least get a meal out of it. Fiona, make sure this young man gets lunch." "Papa, I will watch the store." There was no arguing with that tone. At noon, Fiona found herself walking down the dusty main street with Harrison Reid beside her, headed toward Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The town was busy with the usual midday activity. Miners heading to and from the coal fields that gave Rock Springs its prosperity, railroad workers taking their break, merchants hawking their wares. Several people nodded to Fiona, their eyes curious about her companion. "You will have the whole town talking," Fiona said. "About what? About me walking with a strange man." "I am not that strange." Despite her nervousness, Fiona laughed. "You know what I mean." "Does it bother you what people think?" Fiona considered the question. "It used to. I spent years trying to be exactly what this town expected. The dutiful daughter, the respectable shopkeeper. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was living my life for everyone except myself. That is a lonely way to exist." She glanced at him, surprised by the understanding in his voice. "You sound like you speak from experience." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "I have spent the last 3 years drifting. After my father died, I could not stay on the ranch. Too many memories, too much grief. So I sold everything and just started riding. Told myself I was looking for something, but really I was just running away. What changed? I woke up in a different town with no memory of how I got there or why I was going, and I realized I was tired. Tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of not mattering to anyone." They had reached Mrs. Chen's boarding house, a 2-story building with a wide porch and cheerful yellow paint. The woman herself greeted them at the door, a petite Chinese woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Fiona Reynolds, this is a surprise. And you must be the young man who took a room here last night." "Harrison Reid, madam. Pleased to meet you properly." Mrs. Chen led them to a table near the window and brought out generous portions of beef stew with fresh bread. As they ate, Fiona found herself talking more freely than she had with anyone in years. Harrison asked questions and actually listened to the answers, his attention focused entirely on her in a way that was both unnerving and exhilarating. "What do you want, Fiona Reynolds?" he asked suddenly. If you could have anything in the world, what would it be? No one had ever asked her that before. Fiona set down her spoon and looked out the window at the town she had known her entire life. "I want to matter. I want to build something that lasts. My father's mercantile is good, but it is his dream, not mine. I have been saving money and I have ideas about expanding, bringing in more variety, maybe even opening a second location. But every time I mention it, Papa says it is too risky, too ambitious for a woman." "Sounds like he is scared of losing you." Fiona blinked. "What? If you build your own success, you will not need him anymore. That is a terrifying thing for a parent. I would never abandon him. He probably knows that in his head, but fear does not always listen to logic." They walked back to the mercantile slowly, the afternoon sun hot on their shoulders. At the door, Harrison paused. "Thank you for lunch and for the conversation. It has been a long time since I talked to anyone about real things." "You are welcome. And thank you for the work this morning. The storeroom looks better than it has in years. I could come back tomorrow, finish the job properly." Fiona knew she should say no. Every instinct born of 23 years of propriety and caution screamed at her to send him away before this became something she could not control. But when she looked at Harrison Reid, at the hope and uncertainty in his whiskey-colored eyes, all those sensible thoughts evaporated like rain on summer stones. "Tomorrow would be fine," she said softly. That night, Lying in bed again, Fiona pressed her hand against her chest and felt her heart beating too fast. She was in trouble, she realized. Deep trouble, because Harrison Reid was not just any drifter. He was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with violence, and everything to do with the way he looked at her like she was worth staying for. The pattern repeated itself over the following days. Harrison arrived each morning and worked around the mercantile, fixing things that had been broken for months, organizing inventory, even serving customers when the store got busy. Thomas watched him with cautious approval, and Fiona watched him with something she was afraid to name. On the fourth day, Harrison took his lunch break to walk with Fiona to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. They sat on a sun-warmed boulder and shared the sandwiches she had packed, looking out at the endless grass rippling in the wind. "Tell me about your mother," Harrison said. Fiona was surprised by the question. No one asked about her mother anymore. It was as if the whole town had decided that 12 years was long enough to grieve, and Sarah Reynolds should simply fade from memory. "She was wonderful," Fiona said slowly. "Strong and kind and funny. She could make friends with anyone. When she walked into a room, everything got brighter somehow. I think that is why Papa has never remarried. No one could possibly measure up. You must miss her. Every day. Especially when I have questions about life, about who I am supposed to be. I keep thinking she would know what to tell me." Harrison reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple and natural, but it sent electricity racing up Fiona's arm. "I think you already know who you are. You just need permission to admit it. And who is that? Someone brave, someone capable. Someone who wants more than this town thinks she should have and is tired of apologizing for it." Fiona turned to look at him fully. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are wasted here, arranging preserves and waiting for your father to see you as more than a little girl who needs protecting. I know you are brilliant with numbers and have ideas that could actually work if someone gave you the chance. I know you deserve better than to slowly disappear into the background of your own life." Tears pricked at Fiona's eyes. "Why do you care?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth staying for. And I have not felt that in 3 years. Harrison, you do not have to say anything. I know I am just a drifter with nothing to offer except a horse and some saved wages, but I want you to know that I am not leaving Rock Springs. Not yet. Maybe not ever if you give me a reason to stay." Fiona's breath caught. "What kind of reason?" He lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, where she could feel his heart beating as fast as her own. "The kind where you tell me I am not alone in this. Where you admit that maybe, possibly, you have been thinking about me even half as much as I have been thinking about you." "I barely sleep anymore," Fiona whispered, "because every time I close my eyes I see you." Harrison made a sound low in his throat and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Can I kiss you, please?" The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Fiona leaned into him and Harrison pulled her closer, and suddenly it was not gentle anymore. It was fierce and hungry and full of all the loneliness and longing they had both been carrying. When they finally pulled apart, Fiona was trembling. "Oh," she said breathlessly. Harrison laughed, pressing his forehead against hers. "Yeah, oh. What do we do now? We figure it out together. If you want to." Fiona thought about her father's warnings, about the gossip that would follow, about all the ways this could go wrong. But she also thought about how Harrison looked at her like she was extraordinary, how he listened when she talked about her dreams, how for the first time in her life she felt like someone truly saw her. "I want to," she said. They walked back to town holding hands, and if anyone noticed, Fiona found she did not care. That evening, she told her father she was courting Harrison Reid. Thomas looked at her for a long time, his face unreadable. "He is a drifter, Fiona." "He was. I think he is trying to be something else now. Men like that do not change." "Maybe not. But maybe he does. Do you trust me, Papa?" Thomas sighed heavily. "With my life. But I do not trust him." "Then trust that I am smart enough to know my own heart." It was not the blessing she had hoped for, but it was not a refusal either. Over the following weeks, Harrison became a fixture in Rock Springs. He took a job at the livery stable, working with horses and earning steady wages. In the evenings, he and Fiona would walk together, talking about everything and nothing, building something real between them. One night, nearly a month after Harrison's arrival, they sat on the porch of the mercantile watching the stars emerge. Fiona leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in a way she had never been with anyone else. "I talked to the bank today," Harrison said quietly. Fiona straightened. "About what?" "About a loan for expansion." "Harrison, what are you talking about?" He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Your ideas about growing the mercantile. I have been thinking about them, and they are good, Fiona. Really good. You could offer items that people around here have to travel to Cheyenne for right now. Better selection of fabrics, more tools, maybe even some furniture. You could become the premier supplier for the entire region. That takes capital we do not have. That is what loans are for, and I have some money saved. Not a lot, but enough to show the bank we are serious." Harrison took both her hands in his. "I am not going anywhere, Fiona. I told you I was staying, and I meant it. I want to build a life here, with you, if you will have me." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "You really mean it?" "Every word. I love you, Fiona Reynolds. I think I started falling the moment you told me most people are gone by sunset. You looked so fierce and sad and beautiful, and I thought, that is a woman worth knowing, worth staying for." "I love you too," Fiona said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I tried not to. I tried to be sensible and careful, but Harrison, you make me want to be brave." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise. When they pulled apart, Fiona was smiling through her tears. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We talk to your father. We make him see that this is not about you leaving him, but about building something bigger. And then, if he agrees, we go to the bank together." The conversation with Thomas the next morning was difficult. He argued that expansion was too risky, that they could lose everything. But Fiona stood her ground, laying out her plans with a confidence she had not known she possessed. Harrison backed her up with facts and figures, showing he had done his research. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of debate, Thomas held up his hands in surrender. "You are your mother's daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have done the exact same thing, charged ahead with a crazy plan and made it work through sheer determination." "So you will support us?" Fiona asked, "on one condition." "Harrison, what are your intentions toward my daughter?" Harrison stood and met Thomas's gaze squarely. "I intend to marry her, sir. With your blessing, I hope, but with or without it, because I cannot imagine my life without her in it." Thomas studied him for a long moment. "You hurt her, and I will make you regret the day you rode into Rock Springs. If I hurt her, I will deserve whatever you do to me. Then you have my blessing, both of you." Fiona threw her arms around her father, crying again. Thomas patted her back awkwardly, then pulled back to look at her. "When did you grow up so much?" "I think I have been grown up for a while. You just could not see it." The bank meeting was surprisingly successful. The loan officer, impressed by their detailed plans and Harrison's willingness to invest his own money, approved a loan that would allow them to double the size of the mercantile and significantly expand inventory. Construction began in early September, with Harrison overseeing the work while Fiona managed ordering and logistics. They married in October, a simple ceremony at the small church with Mrs. Chen and a handful of friends as witnesses. Fiona wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and Harrison wore a new suit he had saved for weeks to afford. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The expanded mercantile opened in November to considerable fanfare. Fiona's instincts proved correct, and customers came from miles around to browse the enhanced selection. Within 3 months, they had paid off a significant portion of the loan. Within 6, Thomas announced he was ready to start stepping back, content to let his daughter and son-in-law run the business while he enjoyed a well-earned semi-retirement. Winter settled over Rock Springs with snow and cold winds that howled through the gaps in buildings. Fiona and Harrison moved into their own small house, a 2-room cabin that they furnished slowly but lovingly. On cold nights, they would lie together in front of the fire, planning their future. "I want children," Fiona said one night, her head pillowed on Harrison's chest. "At least 3. "Only 3, all right, 4, but no more than that." Harrison laughed and kissed the top of her head. "Whatever you want, wife. I want them to know they can be anything, that they do not have to fit into boxes other people build for them. They will know. Because they will have you as a mother." Spring brought challenges. A competitor tried to open a store across the street, attempting to undercut their prices. But Fiona's reputation for quality and fair dealing had already established the Reynolds Mercantile as the trusted choice. The competitor closed within 2 months, unable to match their service or selection. In June, exactly 1 year after Harrison had first walked through the mercantile door, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Harrison that night, watching nervously for his reaction. His whoop of joy could probably be heard 3 streets over. "We are having a baby," he said, spinning her around carefully. "We are having a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Fiona. I am terrified and thrilled and more grateful than I have words for. This time last year I was alone and purposeless, and now I have you and a business and a baby on the way. How did I get so lucky?" "You stayed," Fiona said simply. "When everyone expected you to leave, you stayed. I told you, I am staying for you, always." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Fiona suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months and swelling in the later ones. But Harrison was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet and bringing her ginger tea, and never complaining when she woke him at 3 in the morning because she needed pickles and cheese. Their son was born in February 1880, during a snowstorm that buried Rock Springs under 3 feet of white. Harrison paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Chen and the doctor attended to Fiona, wearing a path in the floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room to find his wife exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced infant. "Harrison Reid, meet your son," Fiona said softly. Harrison approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby was tiny and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same green as his mother's. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I cannot believe this is real. What should we name him?" They had debated names for months, unable to agree. But looking at his son, Harrison knew. "Henry, after my father. Henry Thomas Reid, after both our fathers," Fiona smiled. "Perfect." Henry was a good baby, easy and happy. He slept well and ate well and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Fiona took to motherhood with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else, refusing to let it slow her work at the mercantile. She would nurse Henry in the back office, then strap him to her chest in a sling while she served customers. Harrison marveled at her strength. When Henry was 6 months old, they opened a second location in Green River, the next town over. Harrison managed the new store while Fiona oversaw both operations, visiting Green River twice a week to check on progress. Thomas, now fully retired, doted on his grandson with the devotion of a man discovering joy anew. "I was too strict with you," he told Fiona one afternoon while watching Henry play with wooden blocks on the floor. "I was so afraid of losing you like I lost your mother that I tried to keep you small and safe. I am sorry for that. You did your best, Papa, and I turned out all right. You turned out extraordinary, just like Sarah said you would." Life settled into a rhythm both busy and content. The mercantiles thrived. Henry grew into a bright, curious toddler who asked endless questions and followed his father around like a shadow. And Fiona and Harrison fell more deeply in love with each passing day, their bond strengthened by shared dreams and hard work, and the simple joy of building a life together. On their second anniversary, Harrison took Fiona back to the boulder where he had first kissed her. The prairie grass was golden in the autumn sun, and the wind carried the scent of distant rain. "I have been thinking about that day you first walked into the mercantile," Harrison said, holding both her hands. "About how close I came to just riding through. If I had stopped at a different store for supplies, or if you had not been working that day, or if 1,000 other small things had gone differently, we would never have met. But they did not go differently. You came to our store and I was there, and you decided to stay." "I decided to stay for you," Harrison corrected. "That has never changed, Fiona. You are still the reason I wake up grateful every morning. You are still the reason I work hard and dream big and believe in better things. I am staying for you for all the days I have left." Fiona kissed him, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. When they pulled apart, she was crying happy tears. "I used to think my life would be small, that I would spend my years behind a counter in my father's store, watching other people live while I just existed. But then you walked in and saw me, really saw me, and you gave me permission to want more. You gave me permission to be myself. You always had that permission. You just needed someone to remind you." They sat on the boulder until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. In the distance, Rock Springs glowed with lamplight, a small beacon of civilization in the vast wilderness. Their town, their home, their life together. More children came in the years that followed. A daughter, Emma, born in 1882 with Fiona's red hair and her father's easy laugh. Another son, James, in 1884, serious and thoughtful even as a baby. And finally, another daughter, Clara, in 1886, who arrived screaming her displeasure at the world and never really stopped, full of fire and opinions from day one. The mercantiles continued to grow. By 1885, they had expanded into Evanston as well, creating a small empire of general stores that served the southwestern Wyoming territory. Fiona proved to be a brilliant businesswoman, with instincts for what customers wanted before they knew themselves. Harrison was the steady hand that kept everything running smoothly, the one who could fix problems and mediate disputes and make everyone feel valued. They hired staff, training young people from the area and giving them opportunities they might not have had otherwise. The Reynolds name became synonymous with quality and integrity throughout the region. Other business owners sought Fiona's advice. The territorial legislature invited Harrison to testify about commerce and trade routes. They were successful by any measure. But success never changed what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been, Harrison and Fiona would sit together after the children were in bed and talk about their day. They would hold hands and make plans and remember the scared, lonely people they had been before they found each other. And every night before they slept, Harrison would whisper the same words, "I am staying for you." And every night, Fiona would respond the same way, "I know. And I am staying for you too." In 1890, Wyoming achieved statehood. Rock Springs celebrated with parades and speeches and fireworks. Fiona and Harrison stood with their 4 children and watched the festivities, part of the community they had helped build and strengthen. Henry, now 10, asked questions about government and politics with the same curiosity he brought to everything. Emma, 8, danced to the music with her younger siblings, all of them laughing and carefree. "Did you ever imagine this?" Fiona asked, leaning against Harrison's shoulder. "When you rode into town that day, did you imagine you would still be here 12 years later with a wife and 4 children and a business empire?" Harrison pulled her close. "I imagined nothing beyond the next town, the next meal, the next sunrise. I was empty, Fiona. And then I met you, and suddenly I could see a future worth having. I was empty too. I just did not realize it until you showed me what fullness felt like." They stayed until the fireworks ended, until the children were yawning and Clara was asleep on Harrison's shoulder. Walking home through the lamp-lit streets, surrounded by their family, Fiona felt a contentment so complete it almost scared her. How had she gotten so lucky? How had this become her life? As if reading her thoughts, Harrison squeezed her hand. "We earned this, every bit of it. Through hard work and faith and refusing to settle for less than we deserved." "I love you," Fiona said, "more than I thought it was possible to love another person. Good, because you are stuck with me for at least another 50 years. "Only 50, he laughed. "We will renegotiate after that." The children grew and changed. Henry developed a passion for mechanics and engineering, always tinkering with machines and inventions. Emma showed artistic talent, filling sketchbooks with drawings of everything she saw. James was the scholar, reading everything he could get his hands on and asking questions that would stump a philosophy professor. And Clara, true to her dramatic entrance into the world, became the performer, singing and dancing and demanding attention wherever she went. Fiona and Harrison encouraged all of it. They bought Henry tools and books on engineering. They found Emma an art teacher from back east who spent summers in Wyoming. They made sure James had access to every book published. They built Clara a small stage in the barn and sat through countless performances of plays she wrote herself. "We are raising extraordinary children," Harrison observed one evening, watching Clara rehearse a scene while her siblings provided reluctant assistance. "We are raising children who know they are loved and supported," Fiona corrected. "That is what makes them extraordinary." In 1895, tragedy struck when Thomas Reynolds passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Fiona grieved deeply for the father who had protected her perhaps too well, but had ultimately let her fly. At the funeral, she spoke about how he had given her the greatest gift a parent can give, the freedom to become herself. Harrison held her while she cried, offering the silent strength that had sustained her through so many challenges. And when the grief became too heavy, he would tell her stories about Thomas that made her laugh through her tears, reminding her that love does not end just because life does. The children helped too, in their own ways. Henry built a beautiful wooden box to hold his grandfather's pocket watch and other treasured items. Emma drew a portrait of Thomas from memory that captured his stern exterior and kind eyes perfectly. James wrote a poem about legacy and love that reduced half the funeral attendees to tears, and Clara sang, her young voice filling the church with a sweetness that felt like grace. "Your father would be so proud of them," Harrison said that night. "Of all of you." He was proud. He told me so near the end. He said he had been wrong to try to keep me small, and that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. He was a good man, flawed like we all are, but good at his core. With Thomas gone, Fiona found herself thinking more about legacy. What would they leave behind? What would their children remember? It was not enough to build a successful business. She wanted to build something that mattered, something that made the world a little better. She started volunteering at the school, using mercantile profits to buy books and supplies for children whose families could not afford them. Harrison joined the town council and pushed for improvements to infrastructure and services. Together, they sponsored a scholarship fund for students who wanted to pursue higher education but lacked the means. "We are good at this," Harrison said one night, reviewing applications for the scholarship fund. "Working together to make things better." "We are good at a lot of things together," Fiona replied with a smile that made Harrison set aside his paperwork and pull her into his arms. "Are you flirting with me, Mrs. Reid? After 17 years of marriage and 4 children, I think I have earned the right to flirt with my husband." "You have earned the right to anything you want." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of people who knew each other completely, who had weathered storms together and come out stronger. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with Harrison's arms around her, Fiona thought about the girl she had been at 23, arranging preserves and dreaming of more. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me. For staying. For giving me the life I did not know how to ask for." Harrison kissed her temple. "You gave me the same thing. We saved each other, Fiona. That is the truth of us." The new century arrived with hope and celebration. Wyoming was growing, changing, modernizing. Automobiles began appearing on the streets, though most people still relied on horses. Electricity came to Rock Springs, and the mercantiles were among the first businesses to install electric lights. The world was transforming at a dizzying pace, but some things remained constant. Fiona and Harrison still walked to their boulder sometimes, just the two of them, to watch the sunset and remember. They still held hands across the dinner table. They still finished each other's sentences and communicated in glances that their children found both embarrassing and sweet. Henry left for university in 1898, heading to Denver to study engineering. Emma followed 2 years later, going to San Francisco to attend art school. It was hard letting them go, harder than Fiona had anticipated. But she remembered what it felt like to be held back by fear, and she refused to do that to her children. "They will come back," Harrison assured her as they waved goodbye to Emma at the train station. "And even if they do not, they will take our love with them wherever they go." "When did you become so wise?" "Around the time I decided to stop running and start living." James and Clara were still at home, teenagers now and navigating all the drama that entailed. James had developed an interest in law and spent his free time at the courthouse, watching trials and asking the lawyers questions. Clara had her heart set on the stage and practiced constantly, her voice ringing through the house at all hours. "You ever miss it?" Fiona asked Harrison one quiet evening. They were in their 40s now, graying at the temples and slower than they used to be, but still strong and healthy. "The drifting, the freedom of the road." Harrison looked at her in genuine surprise. "Not even once. That was not freedom, Fiona. That was running away. This is freedom, knowing I have a home and a family and a purpose, knowing I matter to someone besides myself. You matter to a lot of people, but mostly to you, and that is enough." In 1903, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include half of Rock Springs. The house they had built years earlier was filled with friends and family, with music and laughter and enough food to feed an army. Henry traveled back from Denver, where he now worked for a prestigious engineering firm. Emma came from San Francisco, where she was making a name for herself as an illustrator. James and Clara, both still at home, had organized most of the celebration. At one point in the evening, Thomas Chen, Mrs. Chen's eldest son and now a successful attorney, stood up to make a toast. To Fiona and Harrison Reid, who proved that staying power beats wanderlust every time, who built not just businesses but a community, who showed all of us what real partnership looks like. May they have another 25 years as blessed as the first. Everyone raised their glasses, and Fiona felt tears on her cheeks. Harrison pulled her close and kissed her in front of everyone, not caring who saw. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "Best 25 years of my life," he said. "Mine too." Later, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed despite being far too old for such things, Fiona and Harrison sat on their porch and looked at the stars. The town had grown so much since that day in 1878 when a dusty drifter had walked into a mercantile looking for supplies. Buildings stretched farther. Electric lights glowed in windows. Progress marched ever forward. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Fiona asked. "When I asked if you were passing through, I said I was planning on it. And then you stayed. You said you were staying for me." Harrison took her hand, his touch as familiar as her own heartbeat. "I am still staying for you. Every day I make that same choice. You are still the reason, Fiona. You have always been the reason. Even when I am difficult, especially then." They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who had weathered every storm and come out stronger. In the distance, a train whistle blew, carrying other drifters to other destinations. But Harrison Reid was home, and he had no intention of ever leaving. The years continued their steady march. James graduated from law school and opened a practice in Rock Springs, becoming the town's advocate for miners' rights and fair labor practices. Clara, despite her theatrical dreams, fell in love with a rancher named Daniel Murphy, and surprised everyone by settling into ranch life with the same dramatic flair she brought to everything else. Henry married a woman he met in Denver, an engineer like himself, and they had 2 children who called Fiona and Harrison Grandma and Grandpa and filled their visits with joy. Emma married later to a fellow artist, and they split their time between San Francisco and Wyoming, creating beautiful works that captured the spirit of the West. In 1910, Harrison turned 57 and Fiona turned 55. They were grandparents now, with more grandchildren coming each year, it seemed. Their hair was more gray than not, and they moved a little slower, but their love had only deepened with time. One afternoon in August, Harrison found Fiona in the office of the mercantile, going through old ledgers. She looked up when he entered, her green eyes still as bright as they had been 32 years ago. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "This." She held up a ledger from June 1878. "I wanted to see if we still had a record of your first purchase, and look, here it is. June 15th, 1878. $2.30 for coffee, hardtack, and jerky." Harrison moved behind her chair and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Best $2.30 I ever spent. You did not know that then. You thought you were just a drifter passing through." "No, I knew something had changed the moment I saw you. I just did not know what to call it yet." Fiona closed the ledger carefully and turned in her chair to look up at him. "We have had a good life, haven't we? The best. And it is not over yet." "No, but someday it will be. And when it is, I want you to know that you gave me everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I doubted myself. You stayed when everyone expected you to go." Harrison knelt beside her chair, ignoring the protest of his aging knees. Fiona Reynolds Reid, you are the love of my life. My partner, my best friend, my reason for everything good I have ever done. I am staying for you until my last breath, and if there is anything beyond this life, I will find you there too. They kissed, soft and sweet, a reaffirmation of vows spoken decades ago and renewed every day since. When they pulled apart, both were crying happy tears. "We should probably get back to work," Fiona said, laughing and wiping her eyes. "Probably. But let us take a minute first." They sat together in comfortable silence, holding hands and listening to the sounds of the mercantile around them. Customers browsing, the clerk helping someone, the distant ring of the cash register. These were the sounds of the life they had built, the legacy they would leave. That evening they walked out to their boulder one more time. The prairie was the same as it had always been, endless and beautiful and full of possibility. They sat in their usual spot, Harrison's arm around Fiona's shoulders, and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "I love you," Fiona said. Not for the first time, not even for the 1,000th time, just another iteration of the truth that had defined them. "I love you too. Always have, always will." As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, they walked back to town hand in hand, their steps slow but steady. Behind them, the prairie stretched on forever. Ahead, Rock Springs glowed with light and life and the promise of another day. And between them, still strong after all these years, was a love that had started with a chance meeting and a decision to stay. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that come with age. They gradually reduced their involvement in the day-to-day operations of the mercantiles, trusting James and a capable staff to manage things. They spent more time with grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom and the simple knowledge that they were deeply loved. In 1915, the world was changing in ways both exciting and terrifying. War raged in Europe, though America had not yet joined the fight. Technology advanced at a breakneck pace. Women were fighting for the right to vote, a cause Fiona supported vocally despite the controversy it caused in some circles. "You are still trying to change the world," Harrison teased her one afternoon. "Someone has to. And I have experience being underestimated. I know what it is like to want more than people think you should have. That you do, and you have never stopped fighting for it." On their 37th anniversary in 1913, their children and grandchildren threw them another celebration, smaller than the 25th but no less heartfelt. Emma had created a family tree, beautifully illustrated, showing the legacy of Fiona and Harrison Reid. Henry gave a speech about how his parents had taught him that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made fresh every day. James spoke about integrity and partnership. And Clara, ever the performer, sang a song she had written especially for the occasion about two people who found each other against all odds and built a life worth celebrating. As Fiona listened to her children speak, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. They had done it, she and Harrison. They had created not just a family but a foundation, something that would outlast them and continue to make the world better. That night, alone in their bedroom, Harrison held Fiona close. They were both in their 60s now, with aching joints and fading eyesight, but their love was as strong as ever. Stronger, perhaps, for having been tested and proven true time and time again. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had just ridden through?" Fiona asked sleepily. "Sometimes, but it does not last long because I cannot imagine that version of my life. It would have been so empty, so meaningless. I would have stayed in the mercantile, arranging preserves and growing old alone. No, you would have found your courage eventually. Maybe it would have taken longer, but someone as strong as you does not stay hidden forever. But I would not have had you, and that would have been a tragedy." Harrison kissed her forehead. "Lucky for us, We do not have to live that tragedy. We get this instead. This is pretty wonderful. This is everything. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the life they had built and the love that had made it all possible. Outside, Rock Springs slept peacefully under a blanket of stars. The mercantiles stood solid and successful. Their children were thriving. Their grandchildren were growing. The legacy was secure. In the spring of 1918, as the world reeled from war and influenza and unimaginable change, Harrison Reid became ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his lungs and refused to leave. The doctor prescribed rest and medicine, but everyone knew the truth. Harrison was 65, and his body was tired. Fiona refused to accept it at first. She nursed him with fierce determination, sitting by his bedside and telling him stories about their life together. She reminded him of that first day when he had walked into the mercantile looking for supplies. She talked about the first time he kissed her on the boulder. She reminisced about their wedding, the birth of their children, every precious moment they had shared. "You cannot leave me yet," she said one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "You promised you were staying for me. You promised." Harrison reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but steady. "I have stayed as long as I could, and it has been the greatest honor of my life." "That is not good enough. I need more time. We have had 40 years, my love. 40 years of joy and laughter and building something beautiful together. That is more than most people get. It is not enough. It will never be enough. Fiona." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "Look at what we created. 4 extraordinary children, 10 grandchildren and counting. Businesses that employ dozens of people and serve thousands more. A legacy of kindness and integrity and love. That does not end when I do. You will carry it forward. I cannot do it without you. Yes, you can. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You will grieve, and it will be hard, but you will survive. And you will keep making the world better, because that is who you are." The children came to say goodbye, each of them breaking down at their father's bedside. Harrison told them how proud he was, how much he loved them, how they should take care of their mother and each other. He made them promise to stay close, to remember what really mattered. On a warm evening in May, with Fiona holding his hand and their children surrounding them, Harrison Reid took his last breath. His final words were the same ones he had spoken so many times before. "I am staying for you." And then he was gone. Fiona's grief was a physical thing, a weight that pressed on her chest and made breathing difficult. She moved through the funeral in a daze, accepting condolences from what seemed like the entire town. Everyone had a story about Harrison, about his kindness or his wisdom or his ability to make people feel valued. He had mattered, she realized. He had made a difference. That knowledge was a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness of loss. The weeks after the funeral were the hardest. Fiona would forget sometimes, would turn to tell Harrison something and find only empty space. She would wake in the night reaching for him, and the cold sheets would remind her he was gone. More than once, Emma or Clara found her in tears, and they would hold her while she cried for the man who had been her everything. But slowly, painfully, Fiona began to heal. She threw herself into work, into family, into all the causes she and Harrison had supported together. She established a scholarship in his name for young people interested in business. She donated funds to build a community center in Rock Springs. She made sure his legacy lived on in concrete, tangible ways, and she told stories. Oh, how she told stories. To her grandchildren, to her great-grandchildren who would come later, to anyone who would listen. She told them about the drifter who walked into a mercantile one dusty June morning and decided to stay. About the choice he made every day to build a life instead of running from one. about the love that had transformed them both from lonely, lost souls into partners who changed their corner of the world. "Your grandfather used to say he was staying for me," she would tell them. "But the truth is, we stayed for each other. That is what love does. It makes you want to be better, do better, give more. It transforms running away into running toward." Fiona lived another 12 years after Harrison's death, long enough to see women get the right to vote, to see her grandchildren grow into remarkable adults, to hold her first great-grandchild. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still offering advice and support to anyone who needed it. On a summer evening in 1930, 75 years old, and surrounded by her family, Fiona Reynolds Reid passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her last words, whispered to Emma who sat beside her, were about Harrison. "Tell him I am coming. Tell him I kept my promise. Tell him I am staying for him too." They buried her next to Harrison, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The service was standing room only, with people coming from across the state to pay their respects to a woman who had built an empire, raised a family, and touched countless lives. But more than any of that, they came to honor a love story that had started with a simple decision and lasted beyond death itself. On her tombstone, beside Harrison's, they carved the words that had defined them. She stayed for him. He stayed for her. Together, they showed us all what staying really means. And in Rock Springs, Wyoming, the legacy continued. The mercantiles that Fiona and Harrison built still stood, now run by great-grandchildren who had never met them but knew their story by heart. The scholarship fund kept sending young people to college. The community center bore their names. And on a boulder at the edge of town, where prairie grass still rippled in the wind, people would sometimes sit and watch the sunset and think about a drifter and a shopkeeper who found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. Because some love stories do not end. They just transform, becoming something larger than the two people who started them. They become inspiration and hope and proof that taking a chance, making a choice, deciding to stay can change everything. Harrison Reid had been just a drifter, passing through on his way to somewhere else. Until he met a red-haired woman with green eyes and dreams she was afraid to voice. Until he said those words that would define the rest of his life. "I am staying for you." And in staying, in choosing her and letting her choose him, he found everything he had been searching for in all those lonely miles. He found home. He found purpose. He found love that would echo through generations, a testament to the power of staying when everything in you wants to run. That was the story. That was the legacy. That was the truth of Fiona and Harrison Reid, two souls who found each other in the Wild West and proved that sometimes the greatest adventure is not in wandering but in staying put and building something that matters. And on quiet evenings in Rock Springs, when the sun sets over the prairie and stars begin to emerge in the endless sky, you can almost feel them there, hand in hand on their boulder, still watching, still loving, still proving that some promises last forever. They had stayed for each other. And in staying, they had shown the world what it really means to love without reservation, to choose someone every single day, to build a life that honors the past while reaching toward the future. That was their gift. That was their legacy. That was a love story for the ages, beginning with dust and ending with forever.